Hello, good morning, and welcome back to the Morning Bulletin here on the Blood Red channel. I'm your host, Edward Kay. Joining me today is Dave Comerford, and we're, of course, going to be starting today by talking about Liverpool closing in on a reported £45 million deal for Alexis Mac Allister, a much lower figure than has been reported over the last few months. Started out around 60-70 million, and seemingly the Reds have managed to get him for a bit of a bargain price, Dave. I mean, firstly, do you think that Liverpool might be slightly underpaying for a player of Mac Allister's talents, and how much of a help do you think it's going to be for the other deals they've got to get done in the window that they've managed to get this one tied up seemingly for such a low amount of money?
I mean, to start off with whether the fee is sort of a big bargain, I definitely think so. You mentioned there the kind of figures that were sort of being floated originally in the sort of 60-70 million bracket, and I think the way the market is now, the way it's been sort of elevated by certain deals, I think that is the kind of value that Mac Allister is. I think he's sort of a £70 million player. So to get him for 45 is a brilliant piece of business from Liverpool, and kind of follows the theme of opportunistic business that we've seen in Liverpool's recruitment for quite a long time. I think in terms of sort of finding out about the existence of this clause and then moving quickly to get the deal tied up to convince the player. I think that's probably why we've seen it so early in the window, because if there'd been any sort of delay, I think another club is probably going to pounce on Mac Allister for that kind of amount. I mean, we're looking at someone here who has not only won the World Cup, but has been an integral figure in that tournament, starting all but one game, getting an assist in the final, scored in the tournament too. And then in addition to that, one of the outstanding midfielders in the Premier League last year, nominated for Young Player of the Season. So, I can't speak highly enough of it from that standpoint. And definitely it's ideal from the budget sense too, because like you say, Liverpool haven't want to use much of it to get the deal done. We obviously don't know what that figure is. But you'd imagine that this will kind of be maybe the kind of bracket that they're looking at for the other one or two midfielders they sign as well. Just that kind of mid-range tier in terms of price. But certainly, the price alone is sort of a 10 out of 10 price tag, you'd have to say. And another thing I think is interesting on kind of getting Mac Allister through the door first is that it sends a message and automatically makes Liverpool stronger. And in a way, it makes the transfer task for the rest of the window easier, because, clubs will see how serious Liverpool are about getting back to the top by getting this deal done, by beating other clubs to it. And also, they automatically become a stronger side, a more kind of attractive side with a player of Mac Allister's quality in it. So it's just a sort of win-win situation in that regard too.
Yeah, should hopefully help with getting a few more players through the door in this window. Obviously, you mentioned, excuse me, how early in the window Liverpool seemingly are managing to get this deal done. Obviously, that's something we've seen before. How much of a bonus do you think that is if we can, maybe not every single player that we're going to get in this summer, but if we can get another couple in before pre-season really starts and we can give Klopp, time with his new players, how beneficial do you think that's going to be?
Well, I think it's huge. It's interesting because Klopp said in the final weeks of the season that it wasn't necessarily a big issue for him if the players weren't through the door early. And that surprised me, because it's not necessarily what you think. But then I sort of thought about it a bit more, and maybe he just didn't want to put pressure on the club, because if he's sort of there saying, I want X, Y, and Z before the 8th of July, I think is when pre-season starts, then that puts a lot of pressure on the club, and then it makes it seem like he's going to be sort of angry if those deals don't get done. But I think what Liverpool have done now is, they've bought themselves a lot of time. There's still a month to go before pre-season. They've already got a player in the door. The expectation, I think, would be that at least one more kind of comes in before then. I mean, you've got sort of a lot of time now to kind of focus your full attention on the next deal, whether that's going to be another midfielder, which you think it probably is. Probably is asking a bit much, you could say, to get everything done before then. But maybe one way of looking at it would be kind of get your midfielders sorted before that point, and then perhaps kind of the defender that you want to bring in, maybe a backup goalkeeper if Keller release. Maybe those can wait till a little bit later in the window because they're not quite as important. But I just think pre-season, Liverpool, obviously in the Europa League next season, you don't get much time when the season starts before that kind of midweek schedule sets in. And then at that stage, you don't really get too much high quality training because you're either recovering from the previous match or kind of preparing specifically for another opponent. The summer is when you've kind of got a sustained period to sort of drill your philosophy into players and get them up to sort of peak condition. So I think it is sort of the most valuable training time of the whole year, and the coaches recognise that as well. So ideal to get Mac Allister from that point of view, but probably even more important to get other players in. If they're coming from another league and will need more adaptation time. So there's definitely a big incentive for Liverpool to do that.
Yeah, everyone in the comments obviously saying it's a shrewd bit of business getting him for around the £45 million mark. I just wanted to come back to that price point. Obviously, we saw Liverpool pay a fair amount of money last summer for Darwin Núñez, and that came with obviously a lot of added pressure. He's being compared to Erling Haaland, who's obviously on another planet in terms of goal scoring this season. And Núñez, he has experienced a bit of pressure when the goals aren't coming. A lot of people quick to point to his price tag on Twitter, although it's much disputed. Do you think Liverpool getting Mac Allister in for, such a bargain price, maybe underpaying a bit, you think that'll help to reduce the pressure on him to sort of rejuvenate Liverpool's midfield, alongside the fact, it's not just going to be him that we're relying on. There is going to be additional midfield signings as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Mac Allister, in fairness, doesn't really strike me as someone who would sort of struggle with the pressure. And the only reason I say that is because I was watching back for an article yesterday, his performance in the World Cup final. And, I think it was his 8th sort of competitive appearance for Argentina. So he'd not really kind of played too much for them. And obviously kind of playing for Brighton, he hadn't really sort of experienced, any kind of big Champions League nights. And his experience on the very biggest stages in football was limited, and then he goes and plays in a World Cup final, which is obviously kind of on a different level to absolutely everything else. So the thing that kind of characterized him in that match was just complete composure, complete calmness, and it was really kind of striking. I think it was probably the biggest feature of the performance was that he just didn't seem sort of ruffled at all, didn't seem to be sort of in his head about it, and it's obviously really exciting from a Liverpool point of view as well in terms of his ability to make that step up to the top level. Even if Liverpool aren't going to be certainly a Champions League team this season, he is now going to be playing in some of the biggest games in the Premier League. So I've got full confidence in Mac Allister to shoulder the pressure of playing for Liverpool, sort of regardless of the price tag, really.
Yeah, he's shown he can handle it in the big pressure moments, and that actually brings me on pretty well to the final thing I wanted to touch on about him. We've seen he's a pretty good penalty taker. A lot of the talk on Twitter doing the rounds recently has been, will he step up and replace Mo Salah? Obviously, he got that very memorable one against Manchester United in about the 98th minute to win the game. So do you see him coming in and taking over penalty duties after Salah missed a couple this season?
Not at first. I wrote an article about this a few days ago, and it was really striking because Mac Allister basically varied where he put every single penalty. I think there was only once all season where he put two consecutive penalties in the same place. He was sort of happy to kind of put it sort of in any corner at any height, really. And that, to me, and all of them were right in the corner too, so the execution was there as well. And that is obviously sort of a nightmare from a goalkeeper standpoint because, you do all this preparation, but really, based on his recent penalties, you've got no idea where he's going to go, and he's equally comfortable kind of with any sort of placement. And yeah, the quality of the penalties was outrageous. I mean, you don't want to kind of big a player up too much for scoring penalties, I guess, but still sort of, I think he is sort of a specialist penalty taker when you look at sort of how well he is tucking them away. And then I think the conclusion I came to in the article was that obviously, we've got James Milner leaving. He had a ridiculous penalty record for Liverpool. Off the top of my head, it was something like 19 out of 21. I think there was only 2 he missed anyway. And so you've got sort of the perfect replacement there in terms of that secondary penalty taker. In terms of whether he can take on Salah, I mean, Liverpool won't sort of take Salah off them now. I mean, Salah's status in the club is too big for that. But, Klopp said after he missed the penalty against Arsenal that he was going to have talks with Salah in terms of whether he continue in that role. Obviously, that led to Salah sticking with it. He scored the next couple of penalties he took, so maybe his confidence has improved a little bit. But there's definitely kind of pressure there in terms of Salah's missed two penalties in the past couple of seasons, I think. And he knows now that if he does sort of falter again, I suppose that then he does have a player who will be properly breathing down his neck for the penalty duties. So Yeah, I just think it's another option which certainly can't hurt whether Salah's not playing or whether the time comes for Salah to relinquish the penalty duties, because it was interesting actually. Salah actually told Steven Gerrard that he hates taking penalties. I think he likes the goals that come with them for the pursuit of those individual records. But yeah, Mac Allister will certainly be I think vying for that role as well.
Yeah, we'll finish with a little touch on some other transfer news. Potential targets: Kefren Thuram and Manu Kone spotted together on social media recently. Would you be looking to take either of them, both of them, in addition to Mac Allister? Obviously, they're both quite physical presences, especially Thuram. If you've seen the size of him when he's playing, he is a serious unit. Do you think that's what Liverpool need?
Well, potentially. I mean, it's interesting obviously to see them together. They're in the France under-21 squad for the Euros this summer, and I think they're sort of really close as well. I think they've described each other as sort of, as having sort of a fraternal bond previously. So I mean, obviously that's kind of ideal from a chemistry standpoint straight away if you were to get both players. I mean, I think generally we might see Liverpool signing players of that mold in terms of being, sort of very exciting, but also a little bit kind of raw, a little bit young, because Mac Allister strikes me probably as the centerpiece of the rebuild, even though he is only 24, just in terms of the level of player that he is, obviously having that Premier League experience. Like we said at the start, he is kind of a £70 million player. So it might be sort of Liverpool building around him. And he might be the sort of maybe the biggest name that arrives in a way. So it certainly wouldn't surprise me, to be honest. And from what I've seen of both players, I think that they would, they're kind of two of the most exciting in their positions in Europe, really. So I wouldn't necessarily have an issue with that being Liverpool's window, even if some would argue that you'd want sort of a little bit more like maybe Premier League experience, and maybe there's a homegrown quota that needs to be fulfilled as well. But I think a lot of Liverpool fans would sort of take those three as kind of a very good effort at a midfield rebuild.
Yeah, well, it's exciting times at the moment. Obviously, the window just opening, looking like the Reds are going to manage to get Alexis Mac Allister in as the first piece of that midfield rebuild. We'll await confirmation of that. You'll, of course, get that as soon as we have it here on the Blood Red channel and over on Liverpool.com as well. So make sure you're keeping your eyes across there. But for now, from me and Dave, it's thanks, and we'll catch you next time.